And I joined the last meeting in January.
Oh, okay, great.
So-
I wasn't able to be here for that one, so nice to meet you, nice to have you on board. So let's start with approval of the agenda for tonight. Are there any introduction of late items?
I don't have any late items.
Nope.
Nope.
And no one has anything on the table? Okay. Does everyone approve of the agenda? Someone forward that and second it. Terri seconding, and all in favor of accepting the agenda as written. Thank you. And now we'll do adoption of the minutes. So these are the minutes of January 21st meeting. Did anyone notice any errors or omissions?
I wasn't there.
I wasn't there.
Was I?
And
This is up to you, Jeremy and Terry.
Yeah, sure, it's great.
It looked good to me.
Oh, were you there too?
Yes, I was there.
Oh, well, then we should put you on.
She is
It's
there.
there.
Oh, yeah, she's there on others, because you weren't appointed yet. Right, gotcha.
Okay, good. And I noticed, I unfortunately missed the talk about the World Frog Day and the signage that's gonna go up by Barney. That's fantastic. And I can't see from this, so I'll just ask a quick question. Was there anything thought about putting signs at Grafton later?
Yeah, so we started with Killarney, just, that was through council resolution.
Okay.
So we made a start. I'm gonna speak to a little bit to.
Sure, and I don't want to hijack the,
yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, definitely, I think council wanted to start there, but it's not, you know, they're not opposed. I did speak, yeah.
Okay.
I'll talk.
Okay, super. I just
Yeah,
thought while I
perfect.
saw it, I'd
Great, good idea.
bring it up so I don't
It's
forget.
Very good.
Okay, so if there's no corrections or additions to the minutes, can I have someone move to adopt the minutes? Terry, and second it? Jeremy.
I just look at people.
Yeah.
Well, they were the two that were
Yeah,
here, and,
yeah.
oh, I suppose you could have.
Yeah.
Yes, now.
Don't be shy. We need those secondaries. Okay, so we're on to number 3.
All in favor?
Oh, sorry, yes, all in favor? Any dissenting? No, we're good. Okay, number 3, public comments. We don't have anyone from the public here tonight, so we will move on to number 4, which is elections and schedule. So we need to elect a chair, a vice chair, and set up an annual meeting schedule. So I am looking for nominations, if Steph has any, or nominations from the floor for chair. And you are more than welcome to nominate yourself. Right, that's allowed.
Absolutely.
Would you be interested?
Oh, no. Oh, that's a great start. But Jeremy.
I've already done that, been there,
I
done that.
know, but you did so well.
That's why I'm
You did,
avoiding it,
yes.
that's why I'm just hiding under a log.
No, it wasn't so bad.
Can you nominate people who want to?
Oh, yeah, you sure can.
I think
That's
that's
the
been
best
done to me.
punishment for, absolutely.
That has been done to me. How about Phil, DG, and who else is missing?
Ben,
Ben.
yeah, I think they all have spotty attendance.
Yeah, they do.
You know, there's also a Bowen Island Trail Society meeting tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we
Yeah.
all coordinate our schedules.
Yeah.
One of the
Yeah.
kids also be there.
And Phil won't be
So
there.
they usually have it in this building.
Really?
It's
It's
having it at
Well,
the
he's,
Osborne.
yeah, he's on the agenda, but he's
He's in
away.
New Zealand.
He's
He's
still
in
Oh,
New Zealand,
he's
so
standing
not
out
in
there.
He's not
either.
either.
And he's away a lot.
So can I just, let's be clear here, okay? It's only, other than the meeting, the chair just has to work with me on the agenda. It's not tons of work. Right?
Work with, and with Bonnie.
Bonnie does,
Bonnie did the work.
Yeah. Bonnie and Steph do most of the work.
She actually does most of it, but you just have to,
Yeah.
so, Lou?
I'll come to next time unless I understand, I think.
Well, you could be vice chair, we could get to that.
Okay,
Be a little
that I'd
bit
be
here,
open to, so I learned the ropes.
Well, Terry,
I
Jeremy.
don't even know how to do any of those.
I can teach you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more time with Steph in your life, and who doesn't need that?
Should we wait to see if these other people?
They don't want it.
So, you were really good at it.
Yeah, but
No, we're not, we're trying to have not council members.
Yeah.
Oh, I
It's,
see.
it's hard because it's easy for them.
Thank you anyway.
Thank you.
I'll help you.
You were great. And Jeremy doesn't want to do it?
He
I've
did
already
it for a
done
long
it.
chunk.
But that means you're
I'm
experienced.
kind of
Christine,
worn
you're
out.
here a lot.
This is not good feedback.
I was thinking of resigning because I really don't think I'm doing anything much.
Christine, you
We need you. Yeah.
I'm very
What
limited.
about the horses?
Yeah.
Yes. No, we need your
input.
perspective.
So,
You're the longest member.
How about-
I'll be happy to be chair if you guide me.
I will help you because I
Yeah.
don't know what I'm doing. I will, she helps me, I help you.
Awesome, that's fine.
All right.
Wow.
We've all been here for a long number of years.
Thank you so much, Lou.
I don't know what I'm doing, but I.
We can have a meeting.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I am just
But
winging
you
it right
continue.
now, and that's why.
Claudia,
I second this nomination.
Yes, all in favor? Any opposed? I
Can we
think not.
suggest that you
Welcome aboard.
continue with this meeting? You finish this meeting?
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
sure.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Sure.
Vice
Okay,
Chair.
so that is a unanimous decision that Lou will be the next chair. Election of vice chair, 4.2. I think Terry would probably want to do that.
It's a good way to learn.
okay, I'll do the.
Okay, you can help each other.
Everyone's doing
I
it.
second this nomination.
Yes, all in favor?
Very good.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun.
Thank you.
It's good.
So I'm curious, sorry, are we at capacity for volunteers or do we have?
Steph.
All these skill testing questions.
Oh, she's being, this is chair kind of stuff.
Business, chair business.
8,
Must be one short.
9, 10, 11. Hold on. Every
I think I
committee's
saw-
different.
I think I saw a notice in the undercurrent.
Okay.
For this,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
well, we could use more because, you know, sometimes
Some of our
tenants
people
is
are-
half-
yeah.
Yeah,
Did
people.
I see somebody who
really-
asked if we had it?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we got 2 spots, I think. No, Lou's not on the website yet, 1 spot.
One spot.
Yeah. I think there's usually,
Okay,
So if you know anybody-
think about people, yeah, to ask.
It's usually if you hear someone disgruntled, then you, why are you doing the meeting?
Do something
I
about
want
you want to work on beaches, trails, nature? Come, join me.
Yeah. Okay, so 4.3, annual meeting schedule. So we have traditionally been meeting on the 3rd Tuesday of every month.
Yeah.
Do you know, Lou, is that when the BITS group always meets?
No, I feel like it's a bit random.
Okay.
Their last meeting was in October.
Oh,
I want to say
okay.
or November.
All right, so we won't
So
try
it's
and
not-
schedule around them. And plus, we can't just willy-nilly pick new days because the room is available on Tuesdays.
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
the-
and speaking to Chuck from Bits, it just happened, but he was like, oh, I wish I could change it, but he'd already made it for, so it wasn't, we're not conflicting.
Okay.
Yeah, just as
Okay.
we said.
Okay. All right, great. So would someone like to move that we maintain the 3rd Tuesday of each month?
Was there a break in the summer that, or do we?
Yes.
We usually say except August and December, because you guys, it's quite close to Christmas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
3rd Tuesday?
yeah.
Third Tuesday.
So August and December, we generally don't meet.
Sound good?
Okay, a second, were you the first or the second?
I don't know. Just the first to see another hand.
Okay, I'll second it. All in favor? Unanimous, thank you. Okay, number 5, council referrals. So, Councillor David Hawking was going to speak on behalf of the Advisory Planning Commission, but he is presently not here. So we shall do what, do you think? Staff, shall we just move on to?
I think what he's actually been doing with this is just saying, what do you guys think? He didn't do a big, unless, Bonnie, do you want to summarize some parts of
I
it?
think maybe just going through it, I think that's what he's looking for, just maybe some of our comments.
I mean, we could read it together, if people haven't read it.
Sure, I don't mind reading
Is
it
it very
out.
time doing that? Take turns, like a class?
Sure.
Isn't this what he spoke to us about before?
It was the climate change
Oh,
strategies.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. There we go. So this is the draft conservation development report and draft policy. It was prepared by the Advisory Planning Commission.
On behest of council.
Yes, and the council received the minutes from the meeting held on October 21st, and the recommendation for adoption of draft policy will be dealt with at a future meeting, following review by staff and referral to committees. So we are one of the committees to which it has been referred. So turning to page 10 of 30, I'll start the reading. So the executive summary. The Bowen Island Municipal Council requested the Advisory Planning Commission to review relevant material and provide recommendations in a draft policy that will embed conservation development principles in municipal planning. The Commission reviewed background materials such as research on the topic and Canadian precedents. It also focused on including consideration of relevant policies and strategies of Metro Vancouver and the Islands Trust, and drafted a conservation development policy. This report attaches that draft policy as an appendix. The draft is preceded by a discussion of its intent, a list of important considerations, and a summary of the key concept of cluster development. So I'll skip the table of contents. We'll go on to page 11. Introduction. The Bowen Island Municipality 2019 Island Plan includes this priority. B1, strengthen our infrastructure and ecosystems through municipal actions by embedding conservation development principles in municipal planning. The council requested that the APC review relevant background material, review similar bylaws or policies in other communities, consult with Metro Vancouver and Islands Trust, present completed research and recommendations to council, and to draft policy. And this is the report that came out of that. The background, A, definition of conservation development. Conservation development seeks to protect biodiversity, productive farmland, ecosystem services, scenic landscapes, and historic and cultural resources, as well as help maintain the character of rural communities. This is achieved by identifying and permanently protecting ecologically sensitive and valuable areas. Development is then built around the protected areas. Okay, that could be reworded. I'm just making a note of that. Built around.
Yeah.
Conservation development is a goal and a process. The goal is the preservation and protection of natural areas. The process is the reverse of that used for development in the past, when the developer began with what they wanted in the way of infrastructure, lots, and buildings, and then imposed their decisions on the land. With conservation development, the developer and planning authority begin with the land itself, identifying natural areas that should be protected and preserved. Development then is planned to respect environmentally sensitive features of the site and its context, such as trails and open space. Municipalities are identifying the importance of not wasting natural capital, what nature gives us for free, but which still has quantifiable economic benefit. B, the benefits of conservation development include protecting natural capital. Obviously, developable land includes soil, vegetation, rock, and water features, and other gifts of nature that a developer can spend in creating places for people to live. The modern approach to development does not take these features for granted, because it is clear that they have quantifiable economic and social value. Although this issue can be complex, we give the example that residences adjacent to parkland are worth more, that extra value comes from natural capital. Conservation development does not generally increase overall density. Density will generally remain the same as allowed in existing zoning, but council could allow an increase in density as an incentive to the developer to provide additional amenities or building types while adhering to the goals of conservation development. Conservation development requires less infrastructure such as roads and utilities. This can help in housing affordability due to lower cost of providing less roadway construction and maintenance and using a shared water and waste treatment utilities. It also helps protect natural resources such as creek and river courses, forests, ground moisture, and arable land. This is a key objective for Bowen, maintaining and enhancing the natural environment, especially water preservation. It can also aid in the preservation of agricultural lands for food self-sufficiency. Conservation development, if applied to building sites, can increase the amount of rainwater collection. Buildings and properties could include ground storage of water in the form of ponds and rainwater storage tanks. It can contribute to a more robust system of pathways and trails. Off-street trails that connect to various destinations without the use of motorized transportation will improve individual health and help to reduce harmful emissions. Conservation development helps to reinforce the natural character of Bowen. It helps to expand an interconnected system of natural forested corridors that will also help protect wildlife and provide views of woodlands from residences and properties. It can be fire smart. The danger of forest fires is increasing due to changes in climate, resulting in hotter, drier, and longer summers. Removing highly flammable vegetation around clustered homes can be effective while preserving forest cover elsewhere. It can also aid in creating more energy efficient development, thereby helping to reduce emissions that affect climate change. When homes and neighborhoods are easily reachable by trails and there is significantly less new roadway construction, there will be less impervious ground cover and less maintenance required. I don't know if we want English spelling, but neighborhoods is got the American spelling. Conservation development supports transit. The concentration of housing and preservation of open space and forested space will provide safe corridors for people, and especially children, to access transit routes throughout the island. It encourages community connections. The development of shared areas such as natural spaces for trails or agricultural land for community gardens helps foster connections and a sense of community. It can enhance viability for property owners. With appropriate planning and financial management, homes in conservation subdivisions can sell for more than homes in conventional subdivisions where lots were twice as large. And that's, the citation is there. I mean, 3, I need to pass this on. I can do C. Okay, issues related to conservation development include how to permanently protect preserved areas from future development. In municipalities where open space is supposedly preserved but remains in private ownership, there is a real danger that under development pressure, the owner will likely try to develop it in the future. Permanent protection of natural areas necessarily requires considering options such as local, regional, or provincial government ownership, covenants registered against title, or ownership, or at least supervision by an independent conservation group. How will open space be owned, managed, and protected? The key is to place the preserved land into some organization's ownership that has the power and resources to protect, manage, and maintain the property for public use. This could include the municipality or another appropriate park or conservation organization. Yeah, just singular. How small will individual buildable lots be? Although individual lots will likely be smaller, they will be connected to an adjacent network of preserved forest paths and trails. How will density be determined? There are a number of ways to determine density. There should be no reduction to the number of lots that can be built under its current zoning. However, additional lots may be allowed in response to significant public amenities that council may determine worthwhile. How will sewer and water be provided? Sewer and water can still be provided individually on each lot or as a shared system depending on the environmental study or the property owner's desires. How to engage the public to support this strategy. An extremely important element is the engagement of Bowen citizens. A detailed program of public engagement should be the first action if council supports going forward with investigating the establishment of conservation development on Bowen. Do we want to stop there and discuss what we've already
Yeah, good idea.
read before moving on, so we don't quite lose track of everything? So I think we can look at page 11 of 30. Okay, so there could be minor issues, large issues. I'll just point out the first minor issue, which is in section 2 on page 11, first paragraph, the last sentence. Development is then built around the protected areas. It kind of makes it sound like you're building a wall of development around those areas. So it's just a wording issue, and we don't, I think, have to come up with the wording, but we can just alert David, who can then pass on that comment.
Wording could be clearer, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
I think there's, well, something here that I have a bit of apprehension about, and that's the fact of imagining these, you know, where you just go in and you clear cut this node and then you build cluster housing. I agree with the idea of nodal housing. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of protection of the surrounding hinterland, but the idea, it seems to me important to have green dendrites within any nodal development.
Sorry to have.
Green dendrites, like fingers, and
Right.
the reason being that the thing I always think about is as you cut down forest for human purposes, for whatever human purpose, you start to compromise the integrity of wildlife systems, and particularly that's first noticeable with birds. And something like the hermit thrush to me is a real signal species, because they're a forest species. When they disappear, you know, you've really taken a lot out. When they're around, you know that there's proximal wilderness, and to have that within, not just in the periphery, but also flowing through whatever developments are done. I don't know if that's strong, that idea is strongly enough.
Well, there's a
presented
couple of,
here.
ecologically speaking, there's a couple of things going on with species that need intact forests, so like the hermit thrush. And whenever you clear an area for your development, you are creating all this called edge, right? Edge ecosystem, where now you have open space and a forest edge. And that is much wider than you would necessarily think. It's not just like, oh, here's the clearing, here's the forest. You've let in light, noise, disturbance deeper into the forest. So it's actually a much larger area than your footprint. And so grouping development so that it's not spread out does really help with that. And then, but having the dendrites wouldn't help species such as the ones that are more forest dependent, but it does help lots of other bird species and mammal species if it's not such a small dendrite that can move through in different pathways to get to the forest on the other side of the development. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, I was using the hermit thrush as an example of having gone too far generally. And I agree that if you have nodal cluster, you're not within that node up to have that kind of deep forest species. But yeah, certainly diversity of those kinds of things makes a big difference. I mean, I just notice it at my own place. The areas where there are bands of trees and brush that are left become huge nesting spots for birds. I mean, it is a band that's seemingly insignificant. I get waxwings nesting, hummingbirds, jays, this huge cluster, it's usually bird species, that are,
It's because we don't notice the insects.
telling, well, true, exactly. But of course, they're feeding on them, you know, and it's that whole domino or association. Anyway, that was just something that I think needs to be, because, I mean, the tendency, and it's easier for developers, understandably, to go in and just take everything out and then rebuild it, basically. But I don't know how, I'm just thinking about the idea of rebuilding these systems in ways, or how you would do it. There's an example going on by Tiernanog, where they've just, that wasn't obviously built, cleared under conservation development ethos, but there is a really peculiar thing, because there's supposed to be a green belt in there, with the exception that if there's clearing for view corridors, well, the whole thing is a view corridor, so the entire greenway disappeared. You know, I mean, there are contradictions like that you've got to mitigate. You can't just, yeah, I mean, the extent to which you're deferential to nature versus deferential to human priorities, I mean, there has to be a balance there, obviously, if you're, I guess that's the gist of what I'm thinking.
Okay, let's,
One thing that the committee might be interested in is that council has also directed staff to work on a site alteration bylaw. So this is something that would, if and when enacted, would require people who are going to make changes to the drainage or clearing, for example, they have to get a permit before they do that. So it wouldn't be as likely, if this carries through, it's only a proposal at this point, but if it would be less likely for them to clear and flatten a site, for example, and then come and say, oh, there aren't any sensitive species.
yeah. Yeah.
So that's something council has recognized and is working on that as well.
Would
Good.
that be integrated to this all?
It may be a bylaw.
Yeah.
This would be a
Yeah,
policy.
it is going to be a bylaw.
So it's much more
Yeah, it would have.
meaty.
Yeah, it would have
Yeah.
enforcement tools, yeah.
Oh,
So,
good.
but
That's
I
good to know.
like your point too, that it can't just be, just if I can continue, either green and protected and untouched, or urban completely
Fully
changed. We would, so maybe a point the committee would like to say is, we want to encourage natural vegetation
Throughout the
throughout the development, not just in the protected area.
The problem becomes though, if we do want to have developers follow that, then all of a sudden their footprint might be bigger. Because if they're the same density, but they're trying to maintain natural vegetation. But I mean, most people want that in their, surrounding their residences anyway, so it's just something to consider.
This is just a general point, but this always worries me when we start. How much development is still going to go on? I mean, surely we've had so much development. Like, how much land is there still available for development? It really scares me.
That map behind you is the current land use map, and so all of those zones where, I mean, we don't have anything that shows which parts are already built out, but there are lots of little lots and places that have already been zoned and haven't been.
At the end of private ownership, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So, for example, look at all these little lots in here. There's lots of them in Millers and around where the Legion is. There are,
Well, what about the R1s, those can all be developed, and
Yeah.
R2s?
Yeah.
So basically, if it isn't green or
yeah,
what other
if it's
color?
not ecological reserve or crown land, G1, G2, G3, or these greens, which are parks,
Yeah,
in this
it's
map.
all It can all be developed.
and redeveloped.
But has any assessment been done of the build-out potential
Yeah.
for lots?
If I can continue, I don't mean to hog it, but just related framework, the official community plan, and I don't see, the OCP map isn't up at the moment, but the official community plan map that looks like this is called OCP Designations, and it lays out what could be allowed, which is a little higher than this,
Higher meaning?
more density, up to a cap. So the official community plan has a total in it, and I forget what it is. Does anybody remember?
7,500?
507, yeah, 5,000 or 7,500, something like that. And I think that the OCP designation map adds up to that.
And
But
that's residents, 7,500 residents?
population,
Totally.
Population, okay.
yeah. So it would be, anyway, so that's where that's kind of
Is that,
far.
sorry, Sue Ellen, is that, it includes seasonal, or is it just off-season, like permanent?
I believe it's permanent residents, but I'm not sure.
Boy, the summer population just exploded.
Yeah, and so I don't remember, I didn't come prepared to speak to that,
Yeah.
but that is the kind of basics of density thinking for Bowen Island. There are growth, that's one of the growth management tools, is developed in the official community plan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but here in BC, municipalities have them, and local trust areas on islands, and they're the long-term community consultation. They're the long-term vision of much community consultation over many years. So they get renewed and updated, and they usually don't change that much because the physical situation still exists, the character of the community still exists. People, anyway, that's my impression.
Yeah, I don't want to go on too long, but surely
No, we
with
shouldn't
with the
go
recent,
long.
you know, people being allowed to build second houses on their property, that must have made a huge, surely that ups the population, and which should mean that there should be less development on other areas.
That's something that some of us council members are very concerned about.
Okay.
Interestingly, though, it's very expensive to build, so very few of those second dwellings have been built.
Well, I've seen
I
quite
think
a
more
lot.
of them have been legalized.
Well, I see a lot when I go around. Yeah.
I just wonder if there's any mechanism within the municipality to formally keep abreast of these changes, because that changes.
Well, if I may, just to, I don't want to take too long on this topic, but it's, yeah, I've been proposing that we keep a density bank, which is something that the official community plan steering committee did propose back in 2010, 2011, when we did this work in our first draft, was to keep track of it, so that you always knew how much density is left that the municipality could use for this or that. But we don't do that currently, and so we add, for example, affordable housing, there's a need. So those decisions get made. But that's kind of a bigger
Yeah.
land, growth development tools that are not exactly what's in front of us.
Right. Sue Ellen, maybe that would be good to bring up at on a future agenda to talk about the density bank, and perhaps this committee would want to support that and make a motion, a recommendation to council.
I'll wait to be contacted by the chair.
People talk about it.
I'll have to
I
say,
second
I know
that
a lot of people
proposal.
who've raised that question, a lot of people, from a lot of different,
Okay.
well, they don't call it density, they build out, I guess it was population.
Sure, I'd be happy to
Yeah.
report, or
Let's do that another time.
staff can, yeah.
Can I
Terri.
just for my own clarity, so, I don't know, a couple months ago, we went through something similar, it was the active living.
Active design guidelines.
So how does that fit in? Like, that's a whole nother guideline, and this is a guideline, and do they mesh together? or-
Good question.
So the AP CPC has made, actually Kirsty, who's in here, was instrumental for that recommendation of trying to see if all these policies can be united into one. There's one committee who made that suggestion. That would probably take a lot of staff work. It's different interests that are, and I think what David was saying last ECAC meeting was that councillors are faced with decisions they have to make, and they're just sort of, so these are just guiding documents that they can use to help guide
So
their
something
decisions.
similar
So
that we're just going through, a very similar one, but just a whole different
Yeah, it's a little
guideline.
bit of a different focus of this policy, but I hear what you're saying, because there are all these little policies and guidelines and such. And just keep in mind it is a policy, so it doesn't have any tools, like it doesn't have, a lot of clout, it doesn't have enforcement tool mechanisms with this. I don't know if I should bring up something that I found it interesting, one of the ECAC discussion around this policy, the name conservation development. One of the members suggested that maybe it be called conservation oriented design, or because conservation development is a little bit, some people feel a little bit of an oxymoron, or a little bit, maybe not exactly what we're trying to do here. So I think it's more about a design or development or developmental design that is focused on preservation or conservation. I think another thing too is that we don't really have as ecosystems, sensitive ecosystem mapping, up-to-date mapping, or we don't have biodiversity inventory for the island up-to-date biodiversity. So I think it's important, because if we look at park systems in Canada, we look at Jasper, absolutely beautiful, but it kind of was a bunch of rocks that was given, some species thrive, right? So traditionally on Bowen, we've been given kind of the dregs, so to speak, the areas that aren't necessarily biodiversity rich, ecosystem rich. So I don't know, I think there's some language in here, but I think it's like, what is our goals? Like, what are our goals? What do we want to conserve? What do we want to preserve? So having a good idea. There's some in the Islands Trust, you're going to bring something up here for our biodiversity. So Islands Trust has some good mapping.
And while Sue Ellen's looking for that, I'll just, I guess, make the comment that, if this is just a guideline, what developers are going to actually follow it? And if council can't say, oh, if you want to do this development, you need to follow these.
Yeah, they can, but they're developers coming, so council can reserve the right to not let the developer have rezoning or such. And already, just because this is in a draft, I have seen the discussion at the council table. I think we're going to discuss something later on today.
Okay.
And so council has pointed to this draft policy in ensuring that enough land is put aside in sort of a conservation trust, so to speak, or
Okay.
work.
Okay,
So it does, it's a
will
decision-making
influence.
tool.
Okay.
It helps to point to something. There has to be political will behind it, of course, but
Right.
it's a policy, but it's there. And it's something that can be pointed to.
Okay. I think we'll leave that, maybe the mapping.
Sure, I was just going to say we've got some info, and I'm just going to speak to it later on the agenda.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we just want to finish off with that section that I read over. Under B, again, page 11, I found this odd with, it says protects natural capital. Obviously, developable land includes soil, vegetation, rock, and water features, and other gifts of nature that a developer can spend in creating places for people to live. I have a problem with that wording. I think it could be made more clear that that a developer, that enables a developer to provide more natural assets to its, project or something, but it's not them to be able to spend
Exploit or
and
use.
yeah. I guess maybe you could put exploit in there, but this can spend bothers me, so maybe you could just make a note of that for David if he wants that kind of feedback. Page 12, does anyone have anything? I see something, oh no, yeah, just some typos on the last one, but is there anything else that jumped out at people? Sue Ellen?
Under fire smart, second bullet from the bottom, removing highly flammable vegetation around clustered homes can be effective. I think maybe it should be following interface wildfire
Threat?
design guidelines can be effective while preserving forest guidelines.
Yeah.
Because they're, removing flammable vegetation implies sort of clearing. But there are fire smart guidelines, we were talking about them today in this morning's meeting, right, Steph? The emergency planning executive committee. And so maybe just referring to.
And actually, I think they should take out while preserving forest cover elsewhere. I don't really understand how removing highly flammable vegetation around clustered homes can be effective while